Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos pregame walkthrough brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. Ben Grant joined as always by JB, and we are here to get you set for the East Division semifinal with the Toronto Argonauts hosting the Ottawa Redblacks. There's lots to talk about today, although we are going to focus primarily on getting you set for that game Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m. at BMO Field with the Redblacks in town for, I guess, the second time in a few weeks, but this one means a lot, it being the East semifinal. It's a playoff game. We'll get into all the details on that. We're also going to talk about the East Division All-Stars, which came out today. The Argos with a league-high 9 East Division All-Stars. We'll get into that. PFF's top performer for this week was an Argonaut. We'll talk about which one. It might surprise you until you remember how good he was in last week's game. Plus, the Jake Goddard Veteran Awards finalist was announced. The Argos represented there. And then we'll get into all of our usual stuff to get you set for this game. That includes our game preview, our injuries, our OCDC one thing, predictions, put me down for 20, and our CFL picks. All that and more coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. On Saturday, first of all, you got to make sure you are going down to the game Saturday afternoon. It's 3 p.m. at BMO Field. It's going to be awesome. The weather looks great. The environment for playoffs is fantastic. It's always great down at BMO Field. This one is going to be something special. Playoffs always are. They're memorable. And you got to start your day off by going to Something in the Water Brewing in Liberty Village. Drop by, try Longboat Pale Ale, the beer that was made for you, for fans of the Double Blue. And you can also try some of their award-winning beers. They got award-winning beer from all over the place. Every different kind of beer you could ask for, even non-alcoholic beer, even hop water. There's a lot of great non-alcoholic options, but Longboat Pale Ale, and yeah, some of their Hazy Maitland. There's so many good beers to choose from. So make sure you get down to Something in the Water Brewing in Liberty Village. It's the perfect way to start off your playoff Saturday, and then just walk on over to BMO Field. It's only a few minutes from the stadium. Make sure you check out Something in the Water Brewing, our title sponsor. Let's get into things, JB. Were you expecting the Argos to be tied for the CFL league lead with Saskatchewan with 9 East Division All-Stars? Was that something you were expecting?
Was I expecting? I don't know. I don't know if I had given it a ton of thought. I probably thought Montreal. I think, when you think about it, I think Montreal's had sort of an injury-plagued season, so I think that's kind of made their core of that very good team not eligible for these awards. But when you look at the list, it's very credible. I don't think there's anybody who's a soft pick there. And in fact, there's no Kelly and there's no Winton. So, I think the fact that, I don't know if people in Montreal will be upset. I think the fact that they had a lot of their core injured for long stretches probably is how Toronto ended up having so many All-Stars. But I'm sure it'll rankle people in various other smaller communities around this country.
I'm not sure it will, honestly, because I think I think the number might, when you look at it initially, both for Toronto and Saskatchewan, these are not division winning teams, and you look at them both and say, well, hang on a second. And just to run through how that works, every team in the East had 6, except the Argos, who had 9. In the West, so you got Saskatchewan with 9, Edmonton had 7. Winnipeg had 7, BC had 2, and Calgary had 2. So, certainly in the West, there, I think, probably would be more conversation. In the East, everybody had 6, and like you said with Montreal, it's not that they didn't have... They had a lot of players in the same position as, Wyndham McManus, and a slightly different position, but Chad Kelly as well, guys that had missed a lot of games, and so they weren't really consideration. Wyndham McManus, had he played the whole season, I think would have been an All-Star. And in fact, I think would have been in the running for defensive MVP. And so the missed games, the fact that he was only really able to play in 10 of 18 games, that's what made the difference there, and that's why he's not there. And Montreal's got a bunch of guys like that, and that's why Fajardo isn't the quarterback, and instead you're going down the road to Hamilton. But let's go through some of these, and I'll just tell you kind of how this works. So the Division All-Stars are selected by the local voting members of the Football Reporters of Canada and in the respective markets, and also the national chapter. And just for full transparency, I have a vote in there as well. And then the head coaches of each teams have a vote.
For further transparency, I did not have a vote.
And for further transparency, JB does not have a vote, and he's not at all upset about that.
Increased transparency.
And fans also took part in this too. So you got fans, you've got the national, local chapters of Football Reporters of Canada, and you've got the head coaches from all the teams weighing in here. So the Argos that they came up with, 9 of them: Kadeem Carey, Ryan Hunter, Dejan Allen, Makai Polk, Jake Serezna, Deshaun Amos, Liram Haralahu, John Haggerty, and Janarian Grant. So those are your 9. I want to further round that out just by going through the other members of the East. So on offense, Bo Levi Mitchell was the quarterback. I think that makes sense. Like, Cody Fajardo would be the only other quarterback in play. Ottawa's been all over the place with injuries and rotating quarterbacks. Chad Kelly obviously didn't start until after the 9th game of the season. So it really was
the best quarterback in the East. I think that's undeniable.
Chad Kelly?
No, I think Bo Levi has been the best quarterback.
Yeah,
in the East.
In sample size, Chad Kelly has, but 9 games, you're not even thinking about it. It's just Bo Levi Mitchell, and he's been amazing. Bo Levi Mitchell's numbers are excellent. The interceptions are high, but yeah, everything else, he's over 5,000 yards. It's really tough to argue that as the East's quarterback. Kadeem Carey is the running back. The 5 receivers: Justin Hardy in Ottawa, who led the East in receiving, had an amazing year. Tim White maybe raises a couple eyebrows there. Shamar Bridges, the rookie in Hamilton, again, outstanding season. Makai Polk, I was so happy to see him in there. We'll talk maybe more specifically about him in a second. And then Stephen Dunbar Jr. You got 3 Hamilton receivers, but it's tough to deny that. You look at the numbers they put up this year, like all 3 of those guys, you're looking at their production, they would lead pretty much any team in the CFL, any one of them. And so you can't really deny them of that spot. And then along the line, you've got the 2, so center, it was David Beard from Hamilton. That one surprised me a little bit. I like David Beard as a player. I really thought it was going to be between Justin Lawrence and Peter Nicastro. Ryan Hunter and Drew Desjardins as guards, and then Nick Callender and Dejan Allen as the 2 tackles. Nothing in the rest of that group is too controversial. And then on defense, along the D-line, you've got Isaac Adegemi Berglund at one end, Lorenzo Mald in the 4th at the other end. Inside, you've got Michael Wayfield having that huge season in Ottawa, and then Jake Serezna on the other side of him. Linebackers are both Montreal: Tyrese Beverett, Darnell Sankey. And then into the defensive backfield. So at the cover linebacker spot, Adarius Pickett, despite missing the last few games, he didn't miss as many as some of these other guys that we crossed off. And he was so far ahead of there really wasn't another option. Like, I think even if Adarius had only played like 11 games, I bet you he still would have ended up as the cover linebacker, just because I don't know where else he would have gone. Toronto had rotating guys. Montreal a little bit of the same, and Hamilton too. So it was going to be a Darius Pickett. And then Jamal Peters for Hamilton as the corner alongside KB Ento. Deshaun Amos as a halfback. Damon Webb, who I think Argos fans remember all too well from Toronto's first matchup with Ottawa, at the halfback spots. And then Marc-Antoine Dequoy, the safety for the Montreal Alouettes. And then special teams was all Toronto. This is where the Argos swept, and this was really the difference. And so I kind of look at it as it kind of was 6-6-6-6, but Toronto cleaned up on specials. Liram Haralahu as the kicker, John Haggerty as the punter, and Janarian Grant as the special teams player, in this case as a returner. So looking at those Argos, JB, I don't think there's any question about Kadeem Carey. He, I think, has been one of the best backs in the league. I would even say, I would put Brady Oliveira ahead of him, and I think that's fair. I think you look at the receiving numbers, but Carey's right there. You average it out, like if you compensate for the extra carries that Oliveira has, Carey's got basically the same numbers. He's basically running for the same yardage per carry. He's got more touchdowns. And so I think he's in that conversation. I do think Brady Oliveira's numbers are a little better when you factor in the other elements. But yeah, an outstanding season for him. And let's not forget like how far above expectation he was, because he was the last running back signed. Like he was the last piece of this Argos puzzle. We thought it was going to be Dan Adeboboye's show coming into the end of free agency. So you got to be thrilled with his production this year.
He's been fantastic. I thought they've used him. They certainly, I think, were conservative in their use of him, but he absolutely would not be denied yardage. I mean, and I think he has a goal line edge to him that they might take more advantage of in the playoffs.
And then the two players recognized on the line. Where would this team be without Dejon Allen and Ryan Hunter? You got Dejon Allen, who I think is the best tackle in the league, playing on the right side. And Ryan Hunter, the flexibility. He was playing at an all-star level at guard, had to move over to left tackle when Isaiah Cage went down. Cage was having a fantastic season himself. And they haven't missed a beat. Like Ryan Hunter's left tackle play, it hasn't been quite as good as his left guard play, but almost. And that is really impressive to see, to be able to go like last game, the Canadian Shield, those 5 Canadian offensive linemen, but they've been able to go 4 steadily since Isaiah Cage went down. That is a huge advantage. I would say that those two guys, Hunter and Allen, they will never get the recognition they should. Linemen never do. But I don't know if this team is anywhere close to where they are without the contribution of those two.
I mean, they are the, that line, and if you want to include Cage in there, essentially, that's what this whole thing is built on. So I mean, they are easily all stars, and I might even go one more, but I understand not wanting to give 2/3 of the line to one team.
Yeah, and I think there probably is an element of that too, and so I totally get that. But yeah, both of those guys have been astonishingly good.
But you could easily add 2 more guys to that to be all stars.
Yeah, I think you could too, and certainly at the very least, Peter Nicastro, and I think Isaiah Cage, like with the number of games he did play and the level he was playing at. But you're right, you can't have 4. People aren't gonna. It's not gonna vote. Even I'm not gonna vote for that. So that's that's not surprising that you just have. I think pretty clearly the best 2, the highest 2 achieving from this season. How about Makai Polk as a rookie? And he is an East Division All-Star. I want to go through his stats here, but an outstanding season. And let's not forget that he wasn't really in the mix until the 3rd game of the year. Remember, he started the year on the bench. He came into play once the team moved on from Rasheed Bailey. I know we brought that up a bunch of times, but I can't stress how great the foresight was of the Argos management here to see what they had in Makai Polk that early, that they were willing to release their best receiver at that point in the year and then turn to the rookie. And he basically took over from I guess game 4 onwards. It was sort of his show. And so even without being in top of mind, and with going through 9 games with Cameron Dukes and Nick Arbuck, which is not the same as the 9 games with Chad Kelly, he still put up 61 catches, 1,024 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's an outstanding season. There aren't a lot of receivers with more touchdowns than Makai Polk. There are not very many receivers with more receiving yards. There are only 9 other players in the entire league who have more receiving yards than him. Three of whom I think are Hamilton Tiger Cats, because they're absurd numbers. No, only 2 are Hamilton Tiger Cats. But yeah, amazing year for Makai Polk, way beyond our expectations. And we really liked Makai as soon as they signed him. We loved his film. We were excited about him. I don't think either one of us thought he was going to have a 1,000-yard season.
No, I mean, it was more, he flashed, and he can be something. Honestly, like Matal, like you're like, okay, this is down, in the future, this can be a significant player for us. It's really unusual for a wide receiver to be so dominant in the rookie year.
On the defensive line, Jake Serezna was the one Argo that made it This is the best unit, I think, of any positional group in the CFL. The Argos D line is the best. They put tremendous pressure on the quarterback, but they're also elite run stoppers. Are you surprised that only Jake Serezna is there? And is he the right guy? If there was only going to be one Argonaut, do you go with Serezna? Or should it have been Ralph Holly? Should it have been Flo Remalade? How would you
Yeah,
look at that?
I think the injuries, probably the games missed, probably knocked Flo out of the conversation. Um, yeah, I can live with it. I think, as somebody who, he came to the new team and it draws a lot of attention, and in some ways is probably allowing some of his other guys to get there because of the attention that he is drawing. But I think he's made enough big plays in big moments this season that, some, not all sacks are born equal. And I think it's good for the reporters too and the voters to identify that that you can, there are empty calorie sacks, and that's not the case with Serezna. I think if you look at the plays he's made at crucial points in the game for the Argos this season, he is, he's right there with Flo, and I just think it's a matter of games played.
Now, Flo basically played 11 games in this season, and so you're right. I think that does factor in. And the way I look at it, like I think Flo and Serezna are, to me, of equal value, but like you said, games missed does factor in there. With Ralph Holly, I want to make sure we recognize how great a season Holly had. And again, as a rookie, and he and Mackay Polk, both right there for Toronto's Rookie of the Year. They're both outstanding. The difference is, if you take Ralph Holly away from the Toronto Argonauts, I think that defensive line is still an elite unit, and I don't think they miss a beat. I think with Brinkman, with Williams, they've got pieces in place. If you take Serezna out, I'm not sure they have another Serezna on the roster, and I think that would be a much bigger loss. And I think even with Flo Remalade, as good as he is, and I think Remalade healthy is among the best defensive ends in the league, if not the best defensive end in the league, and yet the fall off wasn't huge with Derek Parrish. He had a great year. So I think my argument for Serezna is he has to be there because he is that one piece that Toronto really can't replace. For the rest of the defense, Deshaun Amos, the only Argo defensive back that gets the recognition there, and I think that's correct. I think Royce Metier would have been in the conversation for a lot of people. Deshaun Amos had the best season of all the DBs. I think he was very quietly one of the best defensive players in the entire CFL, and I say very quietly because his stats, the DB stats, are weird. Like if you got two sides of the coin here. Roland Milligan is being acknowledged league-wide as the best DB in the CFL, and I'm not arguing that. I think he was this year. Deshaun Amos is right behind him in turnovers, is nowhere close to him in tackles, and I'm arguing that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think you've got both ways of looking at it. Yes, Roland Milligan has a ton of tackles. He also has a ton of special teams tackles. That's a different conversation. Deshaun Amos doesn't have any tackles because quarterbacks weren't throwing his way. They weren't going anywhere near him. And this is something that we saw with Dietrich Nichols for years, where his level of play was so high, but his stats weren't there because quarterbacks were avoiding him. JB, they need a better way of assessing players like Amos, because I don't think he's going to have a shot at defensive MVP this year. And I'm not saying he should win it, but I think he should definitely be one of like 3 or 4 guys in the conversation for that, and I don't think he's going to be. How can they fix the assessment of players like Amos, who other teams just stay out of the way of?
Yeah, I think you have to find a way to to use like an average, right? Like to look at the number of times targeted, and to use number of times targeted as a divisor, so that when you're figuring it out, if somebody is targeted, only this many times, and this is the percentage of pass breakups that they have in that fewer number of targets, then that is a higher rate of pass breakup. So I think you have to adjust the ratio. You'd have to have a minimum to qualify, because there'd be some guys who wouldn't be targeted that much. But I think if you're looking for high usage guys, when you're trying to compare apples and oranges, I think you do have to factor in how many times they're targeted and make the other inflate the other statistics based on the percentage. Like, okay, well, he had this many interceptions and this many pass breakups and this many tackles with this many targets, and so therefore, you know, whether you want to invent a new number or not, this is their defensive rating as opposed to somebody who maybe has a similar number but with 35 more targets. So therefore, like a batting average, the rating comes down a little bit. I think something along those lines probably has to be done.
Yeah, I agree. There's because I think we see it because we're watching every Argos game closely, but not everybody with a vote around the league is watching every single game with that same level of detail. And so I think there are a lot of people that, and understandably so, rely on stats for this. And target stats just aren't something that is as readily available as something
Yeah,
like tackles. But just
exactly, and they should be. And like
right.
there's lots of different defensive and offensive stats that are adjusted based on percentage. Like, okay, well, they ran the ball this many times, and this is how many times they attempted it, and so the concept is out there. It's just a question of, will somebody release targets as a statistic?
And just to give you an idea of the tackle numbers and stuff like that. So Deshaun Amos on the season has 25 tackles. He has 7 turnovers and 25 tackles. Like, think about that ratio on its own. Like, don't even mind the targets. Like, that is a lot of turnovers for a guy that only ended up tackling the ball carrier 25 times. And you compare that to like Roland Milligan, who had 71 tackles, which obviously it's not quite among the league leaders, but it is for DBs. The linebackers obviously dominating there. Nick Anderson led the CFL with 111 defensive tackles. But yeah, for DBs, 25 is really low. And so I get why some people are looking past him. But yeah, I would argue that he should be right up there. And I think you should be looking carefully between Roland Milligan, who only had 1 turnover more than Deshaun Amos. He's got a lot more tackles, amazing special teams player, all that, I get it. But I think he's right there in that conversation. So just something to think about with him as the defensive back that was recognized. And then the 3 special teams players, Haralahu, totally get it. Haggerty, I get it as well. You look at his punting numbers from this year, they're sensational. Janarian Grant had an amazing first half of the season. He has waned a little bit, but I think we're being a bit harsh on him because you look at his last few games, a couple turnovers, obviously that's concerning, but his returns are still pretty. He still got 1 a game. That's like, whoa, that's an impressive return. I think just because he hasn't had any touchdowns in the second half of the season, we kind of think, oh yeah, he's slumping, but he's just doing what everybody else in the CFL is doing over the second half after having just an elite record-setting first half. But I think a guy that gets... Sorry, go on.
No, I mean, when you become a highlighted person on a whiteboard, teams are coming at you with extra juice. They have had their special teams coordinator yelling at them all week, but we're not going to let this guy, so when you become hunted at an increased level like that, you're going to have a decline. Like it's not easy to be like the premier kick returner in the league, because now special teams guys are staying up at night designing different ways of making sure that you're not going to score against you, and that's going to affect things for sure.
And the guy that I think might have been overlooked here, and I just don't really have a good answer to this because unfortunately it's unfair that there's only 1 special teams player, kicker and punter aside, that gets recognized because it's such a huge part of the game, and it almost always is going to end up going to a returner. I think Jack Cassar, who led the CFL in special teams tackles this year, I really feel like this is an honor that he probably should have had, but it's a very tough argument over a guy that's getting a lot more attention. A guy returning kicks and punts for touchdowns obviously draws way more attention than a guy leading the league in special teams tackles with 22. And he tied with A.J. Allen from Saskatchewan there. But yeah, both of those guys with outstanding special teams years. And that's a career high for Cassar at 22. So just sad that I really feel like there should be two categories there. One for, so you got kicker, punter, returner, and then I think you've got other special teams player, just like, to allow other guys to win it.
Traditionally, statistically, they're the kicker and the punter and the returner have always kind of been referred to as specialists. And so you can have your specialist all-stars, but then you have your special teams all-star, which is the special teams, right? I agree with you. I don't think that's very complicated. I think those other guys are specialists rather than special teams.
And just before I move on to the next section here, did we go through the defensive? Oh, yes, we did go through the defensive all-stars. I just making sure that I covered that for the entire East Division. But yes, I think we have thoroughly covered this.
We talked about how McManus, was passed over with just injuries really being the only reason.
Let's move on to PFF this week. Nick Arbuckle, the top scoring player this week. He's the top performer for PFF. We didn't even know if he was going to play going into last week. I don't even know if he knew he was going to play. Cameron Dukes went down with an injury after one quarter, and in just 3 quarters of play, Arbuckle put up league best performance stats and really did have a sensational game. His adjusted completion percentage was 84.9 because there were 4 Argos drops that were attributed by PFF's grader to have occurred there. So yeah, an adjusted completion percentage of 84.9. That's bananas. That would have been over 400 yards had those balls been caught. He still ended up near 400 anyway. And then he had what they call 3 big time throws and not a single turnover worthy play all game. That is the performance you want from your backup quarterback. And having gone back and watched that game now, I feel so comfortable with Nick Arbuckle as the number 2. If something were to happen with Chad Kelly, I'm not saying they're interchangeable, and I'm not saying that you can now go and win a Grey Cup with Nick Arbuckle. I'm not sure that's the case. But I feel comfortable if the Argos need to be without Chad Kelly for a few series, maybe even a half. I feel like we've seen enough to know that Nick Arbuckle can step in there and be fine. He looked like the guy I think Toronto thought they were getting when they signed him during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's the best he's looked. I thought, I've been on the record as being pretty tough on Arbuckle. I do think that is where he at this point, I think that's where he succeeds. I think he works great if you don't know he's coming in and you haven't game planned for him, and he is wily enough and confident enough to run an offense aggressively enough that you're not just holding on for the win, which would be, I think, more the case with Dukes, just because I think Arbuckle has a little more kind of CFL starter swag to him, if you will. But I thought Arbuckle looked really good. I thought he looked, energetic. He looked like he was in charge of the team, not just kind of looking after it. And I agree. I'm not lining up for him to start. But if you need him to come in the third quarter, I think that he showed a confidence with the offense that was comforting.
If I'm going to play devil's advocate here, the one thing I did notice a little bit on rewatch is that it seemed like it took a while for Edmonton to kind of get out of their Cam Dukes defense. And where Arbuckle made a lot of his money in that game was deep balls, like going downfield. And that's not something Cam Dukes has done a lot of this season. He's been more, picking defenses apart in the short game, using his legs to extend plays and then finding someone. Arbuckle with a very different style of play. Maybe we chalk this up to Edmonton had a game plan for Dukes. They tried to stick with that for a while when Arbuckle came in, and he was really burning them in that second and third quarter. And then they seemed to kind of adjust out of that late in the game, and that's where he slowed down and his numbers kind of came back to earth a little bit. So that could be something that you look at, but that's like what you're saying, where you're preparing for one guy and you get another guy. This is the ideal situation for Arbuckle. Mackay Polk and Kenneth George also on PFF's team of the week. both with great games. We talked about Mackay Polk. That was done in a half, by the way, too. And so that's just something when you're one of the top receivers in just one half of football. But they were really forcing the ball, making sure they got over the 1,000-yard mark with that. Kenneth George Jr., great to see him recognized, too. He had a couple of elite pass breakups. I'm sure that's why his grade was high. That third down play that Edmonton had early in the game, and he just stuck glued his receiver, got a hand out there. That's one of those plays that probably earns him a +2 grade on that play, and that's one of those that can really vault you above everybody else. So nice to see him get recognized after what has been kind of a tough year for him leaving Hamilton. All right, this brings us now to our game preview. JB, this is an interesting game for a few reasons. First of all, it's a little unfamiliar. The Argos have not been in a division semifinal since 2015. That was a loss to the Hamilton Tiger Cats 25-22. I think we can remember that. Still fresh enough in the memory 9 years ago. But they haven't hosted an East Division semi since 2012. That goes all the way back to them playing Edmonton in a crossover. They dominated that game 42-26 over Edmonton, moved on to play in Montreal where they won 27-20 and then went on to win the Grey Cup, beating Calgary, kind of blowing Calgary away in that one, as we remember. 35-22 was the final. That one was at Rogers Center. I think it was Rogers Center at the time. I don't think it was Skydome still. And the path could look very similar in a dome again, not Rogers Center, but traveling to Montreal, traveling to a dome. It starts this week against the Red Blacks, and the Argos have never once played the Red Blacks in the playoffs. They've played an Ottawa team in the playoffs, but even that has been a while. The last time Toronto played against Ottawa at all in the playoffs was 1990. You got to go back. I got to do math now. 34 years to find a playoff matchup between Ottawa and Toronto, and that was a win for the Argonauts, 34-25 and that was Skydome back in 1990. So not a lot of recent playoff history. Both games this year were very odd. You had Toronto getting blown out early at Ottawa, down 31-3 at half. They come flying back, but can't quite do enough to get back into it. Chad Kelly passing for 1 billion yards in that game, but had 4 picks, including 2 pick sixes that were the difference. And then they come to Toronto, BMO Field, just a few weeks ago, and it's almost reverse of that. Toronto dominating Ottawa in the first half. They're running away with it. The game seemed over and out of reach. Toronto up 26 points at the 3-minute warning. And that's when Ottawa turned it on. They recovered 2 onside kicks. They made it close at the end. Drew Brown with 1 billion yards passing at the end of that. So which version of this are we going to see this week, JB? Is there any advantage to either team in having seen these guys just a few weeks ago? Is there an edge in having, had to see Ottawa come back as they did, know that no lead is safe in this matchup? How do you view this game going into it?
I would have been more concerned. We talked about it in the pod. I would have been more concerned had Toronto simply just crushed Ottawa and, had left them lying there 40-10 or something. It's just hard to beat a team twice, and it's especially hard to beat a team after you've really just thrashed them. But I don't think so. I think what Toronto will draw is that they were the better team in Ottawa, and stupid mistakes and turnovers cost them the game. And they were the better team in Toronto, and a failure to finish on special teams nearly cost them the game. And so, essentially, if you're going to concentrate on specials and turnovers not bringing you down, all things being equal, Toronto is the far superior football team. I mean, I think that's my takeaway. I'm sure it's the Argos takeaway. So I would imagine that there's a fair amount of confidence, not overconfidence, but confidence that, if we take care of our details, when it's just us on the field, we are able to be the better team.
Marshall Ferguson had a piece on the CFL website this week that went through each positional group, comparing them. And the one that I seemed to get Argos fans upset about, this is what I saw on social media, people were upset that he gave the quarterbacking advantage to Ottawa. But everything else I think both teams would probably agree with. And you've got Toronto, I think, probably dominant when you go position group by position group. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a win, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a blowout, but on paper, the Argonauts should win this game. On paper, the Argonauts are the better team. It's just, will everybody play at their best? Mistakes, obviously, in a football game can really cost you. Turnovers can really be an equalizer. Turnovers and weather, like those are the things that can make a team that shouldn't win the game suddenly up by a couple touchdowns, can really change the balance of power. So that'll be something to watch for in this game. And as it currently stands, looks like it's going to be sunny skies, a little cool after the very mild midweek temperatures that we're getting, but still well above zero. Nice sunny day, perfect for for November. It's November 2nd. Like, you're asking for better weather in November. I don't think you're going to find it. What a day this is looking like it's going to be. So make sure you do grab your tickets for this one. Let's go through the injury report. Not too much of note on Ottawa's side. Again, both teams being able to rest guys last week. That really helped, obviously. Bennett Williams is going to he practiced full yesterday and today, so he's going to be able to go for Ottawa at the cover linebacker spot, I'm sure. They're also going to have Justin Hardy. He was nursing an ankle injury. He went full the last couple of days. He'll be out there for sure. Nick Mardner with a bit of a question early in the week with an illness. He went full today, so he'll probably be back. And then one that's kind of interesting, Jamal Morrow. He had that hamstring injury. He was able to practice full the last couple of days. There's some question as to what Ottawa might do in the running back spot. And I don't think we're going to know the answer to that until the depth chart comes out. And even then, I don't know if we'll know. We know Kalen LeBourne was the running back, the former Argo, Kalen LeBourne, who played the last time these two teams met. Last week, they went with Braylon Addison at the running back spot, which I thought was really interesting, taking a receiver into that spot. I could see them doing that again. In fact, if I had to bet, that's the route I think they will go this week. I think they saw enough out of that. And with all the receivers now healthy, you don't want to take Khalil Pimbleton off the field. And so by bringing Addison into the backfield, that allows you to keep the rest of your guys out there, because Ottawa does have an impressive receiving core. But at least we know now Morrow is a possibility if you wanted to add a bit of a veteran presence, like an actual running back to your backfield. But I'm not sure if Ottawa does or not. And I'll talk about that more in OCDC. For the Argonauts, it's mostly good news. There's one piece that isn't, and maybe I'll start with that. We'll start with the bad and end with the good. Damonte Coxie, after taking that shot, what looked like a shot to the knee last week, he's shown up as did not practice. He has not practiced yet this week. He's got that knee injury. JB, this is a big concern. There's no other Damonte Coxie on the team. We saw Jake Herzlow come in and play. He would be the guy in line to play that spot. He's been getting reps, obviously. As much as Herzlow played a great game, there's a big drop-off from Damonte Coxie to anyone else on this Argos roster that can play that X position, isn't there?
No, certainly there is not. That's a big loss. Like, that's we talked about it. We were worried after the game. It looked, he stayed, but we were worried that it didn't look good. Did not play is not great. I mean, I guess you can hope for a questionable heading into the game, but even if he's questionable, honestly, and I know that he's an incredibly tough and resilient athlete, but when you're a wide receiver, I mean, you're a sports car. You can't have a bum knee or a bum ankle. Like, it just, there are other positions that might let you grind out an injury a little more. I just don't know how how successful he would be. In fact, I would say you're probably better as a coaching staff to sit him and get him all the way back than to essentially give a spot to somebody who can't go full out. It's a loss. I don't think it's a team destroying loss. But I would much rather he be 100% healthy for Montreal than against Ottawa. I think that they still have enough firepower. This is where Daniels, I think this is the kind of game we need Daniels to really kind of show up. And it's been a pretty quiet season. And I think this is the kind of game where Daniels is going to have to fill that void.
Yeah.
Even though not necessarily directly, but offensively.
Yeah, they'll be looking, obviously, if Coxie can't go, and right now it's looking like that is going to be the case, then yeah, it's going to be Mackay Polk, Tavares Daniels, like you've got to step up. Unger's got to have a big game. He's been a great outlet for Chad Kelly. And maybe this can be a Kevin Mattal game too. Like he's a guy that we've been waiting for, that game where he really announces his presence. Maybe without Coxie, that would be his opportunity as well. But I think it'll be Herzlo that ends up in that X spot if Coxie can't go. But there's still a few days. We're only Wednesday right now. Things could change, but it's not a good sign when you've got 2 did not practices in the first 2 days of the week's practice. To the good news, Dejan Allen full, Isaiah Cage full. That was great to see him back out at practice today. Although I'll caution you a little bit about that. Cameron Dukes limited yesterday, full today. Jonathan Edouard full and running around making plays. That's a real positive sign. Dylan Giffen back out there full. Janarian Grant, he's listed as on the injury report because he was a healthy scratch this past week, but we can kind of ignore that. He's not nursing anything other than the amount of pain that everybody is in at this time of the season. Nothing specific. Jonathan Kwamu is full. Jonathan Jones with a hamstring injury was able to go full both days. Robert Priester limited both days. That's encouraging. I don't think there's any chance we see Priester this week, but maybe down the road, that's something, if the team is able to stay alive and can play next week in Montreal, maybe that's a player that you could welcome back. Richie Sindani coming back from that rib injury, went full both days. Robbie Smith from Daddy Duty has returned. He went full. Fraser Sopik has not practiced with the hand injury. One thing that I will caution you, because I think people will be saying, okay, Cage is full, so he's back at left tackle. You've got Jonathan Jones is full, so he's playing the weak side linebacker spot. I will caution you because we've seen in years past, we thought this was going to happen before in the Grey Cup run in Toronto. We thought it might happen last year late in the season where you had guys coming back. They looked great in practice, but the coaching staff, and I think rightly so, is reluctant to make changes in a playoff game. I completely understand why, but let's not just assume that because this guy, like let's say in the case of like Isaiah Cage, for example, even if he's at 100%, I don't know if you necessarily bring him back and put him in. And this coaching staff would suggest, their history would suggest that they don't, that they would instead go with the guys that have been playing these last few games when things have been looking really good for the Toronto Argonauts and not risk putting a guy in there who hasn't played in 7 or 8 weeks and expect him to suddenly jump into a playoff game. Is that the right move if that's the route they decide to go, JB?
Yeah, I'd probably... at this level, yeah, I think continuity and guys knowing what the other guy's doing is the best. I think it's hard to just plug and play. So I do agree with that philosophy. I think it's shown to be successful. I think on some level, I think you want to dress the other player if at all possible, to have them in the mix. But I think the continuity argument is a fair one. It depends, right? It depends on the position. We're not talking about a game-breaking wide receiver or a game-breaking running back, so it's a little different for different positions.
It's time for OCDC. For OCDC, we will start with the Ottawa Redblacks. JB, we'll start with you. You are the defensive coordinator for the Ottawa Redblacks. You are trying to shut down Chad Kelly, Kadeem Carey, and the rest of this Toronto Argonauts offense. What is your defensive plan for Les Rouges et Noirs?
Well, look, they are very good at stopping the run. They've had a hard time stopping teams going up and down the field on them in the air. I don't know at this point in the season if you can be much more than who you are. So I think from an Ottawa perspective, I'm going to try and improve the deep coverage. Toronto hasn't been a great deep throw team, but I'm gonna try and keep the running back under control, try and keep a shell over the top. But more than likely what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw every trick I have at the line. If you're Ottawa, what do you have to risk? Nobody thinks you're going to win. You've been leaking oil since August. You're on the road against a team with 9 All-Stars. I'm breaking out every twist and loop and blitz from zone and overload blitz. I mean, I think you simply have to in that first quarter send everything you can at Kelly to try and get an interception, to try and get a turnover. You're only going to win this game if you win the turnover battle. And I think you want to get at Kelly early. I think Kelly's going to be jacked up. He's going to be looking to win this game. He's going to be looking to play well at home. I think the first quarter was where Toronto imploded in Ottawa. And if I'm the Ottawa defense, that's my game plan is first quarter, we are going to send every blitz that we have in our book. And then, let's see where we are after that.
Switching to the offensive side of the ball, if I'm the offensive coordinator for the Ottawa Redblacks, first of all, my first decision is I'm going to start Brilliant Addison as the running back. I think that's key. Watching that last week, I wasn't sure about it at first. Ottawa's been weird with like dressing running backs this season. They've played around with a few things. I just don't think running against Toronto can be part of Ottawa's game plan. We've seen moments of it being okay, but that's not why they're going to win this football game. I think you're throwing away downs in a lot of cases. And so I want to try and use Braylon Addison as a receiver out of the backfield, try and create some mismatches. And I go with him over, like Kalen LeBourne, I think, gives you some of that potential as well. Morrow, they're similar kind of guys. I just think Braylon Addison, as an actual receiver, he's got hands, he's got great route running, he's got great after the catch ability. And since I'm not using him as a back, then I want to try and take advantage of that. I'm going to try and leak him out of the backfield in certain cases where it looks like he's staying in to pass protect and help out with this dominant D-line, and then just have him leak out a little bit. And I'm going to go really heavy with running back screens to Braylon Addison and quick throws out into the flats. Like, those are the plays I'm going to try and take advantage of and see if I can really challenge those corners to look in the backfield. And maybe if I can catch those corners taking a peek, I can now go over the top. So combinations of flats and go routes on the outside, I like that. And Braylon Addison is where it all begins. And I think where I get my running is actually from Drew Brown. That's where I want to see my rushing yards. I think there are going to be opportunities for that. I think Toronto's going to be aggressive and come after Ottawa. So I'm going to encourage Drew Brown. When you see an opening, you go. Don't even think about it. Most of the time with young quarterbacks, you're telling them the other way around. You're saying, keep your eyes downfield. Don't just turn into a running QB. But I think here you are pulling out all the stops. You want to try and make this offense really three-dimensional and see if you can have Toronto not just worrying about where the running back's going, what's happening downfield, but having to put some resources around watching that quarterback. If you can get Toronto to budget a spy on their defense, I think you have now won, and you're going to create other opportunities for that elite receiving core Ottawa's got downfield. So a lot on Drew Brown running, a lot on Braylon Addison out of the backfield. And then I want to try and move Justin Hardy around a lot. I want to try and match him up against Tunde Adeleke. If I'm looking at a weak spot in sort of man coverage, if you try and catch Toronto, Adeleke's been playing so well, so I'm not saying that there's a hole there, but I'm just kind of looking historically if there's one guy that I can match Hardy up with, especially out of the slot, that's probably where I attack. And I also want to try and see if I can get Khalil Pimpleton on Tavares McFadden. I think that might give you a little bit of a lateral agility matchup and potential big play after the catch if you can catch Toronto a man. So that is my Ottawa offensive plan. Let's flip over to the good guys, JB. What is your defensive plan of attack for the Toronto Argonauts? How are they going to shut down the Red Blacks?
Yeah, look, full credit to Ottawa. Drew Brown has played really well. Now, Ottawa has no rushing to speak of. But they have shown an ability. Look, even in the last game and then that game against Hamilton, they've shown an ability that they can, they can get in a shootout with anybody. Toronto is not going to just blow them out by putting 35 on the board. Ottawa, with Brown in there, is up to the task. I think again, you're going to have to cheat. You're going to have to steal an extra defensive back. And just rely on the strength of your line and linebackers to keep the run under control. Sometimes you have to steal from your strength. because Brown wants to throw that ball deep. I think you definitely want to keep an eye on Hardy. I think you definitely want to not double him the whole game, but in gotta have it downs, where it's early and it's second and 7. Like I'm all over double Hardy. Don't let Brown kind of get his confidence going. He when he feels it, he is really dangerous. I'm not worried about pressuring him that much, but I definitely want to keep him in the pocket. I definitely, just as you were saying, I don't want any part of him getting free yards. Um, I think that you want to keep him in the pocket, and I think today is where with this plan is where the speed is going to come in. I'm going to play a lot of man. Um, I think we're going to force Ottawa's receivers to shake that man coverage, and especially on those deep overs, which can be really hard to cover in a zone as you kind of run through zones. I think that's where that man coverage is going, and the speed in the secondary is going to come in. So we're going to play a lot of man. Going to keep Brown in the pocket and double, when we feel like they're looking for Hardy. And other than that, Ottawa is not an exotic offense. They don't have 100 ways to beat you. They have a good wide receiver group. You have to deal with that, but that's it really.
I worry about because I agree with you. I like your plan. I worry in man coverage. Like that's where I worry about Brown running because it's in man that running quarterbacks are most dangerous because the defenders all have their backs to the line of scrimmage. They don't see it. And so if there's a little window that opens up and he can sneak through between the guard and tackle or between the guard and center, there's going to be room in man coverage. So that worries me, especially if you're looking to double one of those guys or you're running man two or whatever else you might be running. And then I like the idea of blitzing in terms of not letting Brown get set and fire those deep balls. But then I'm also paranoid about those quick little dump offs to Braylon Addison potentially in the flats and really catch you on a blitz. That could cause trouble. And so maybe this is a time where I keep calling them green dogs. I know that's in Canada, we sort of blitz and engage is more used as a term. The idea that whoever's got man coverage against the running back, you're blitzing, and if the back leaks out, you go with him in coverage. But if he stays in the pass protect, you're blitzing. But I think what's more important there, and JB, I know you've done this defensively sometimes with tight ends and probably running backs too, where you are trying not to let them release, where you don't want the guy to be able to release out. And so you're not holding per se, you're not drawing a penalty, but you are engaging that player. And if they try and release, they just can't because you are keeping them locked in and engaged. And yes, it means you don't get to the quarterback, but you also prevent your guy from leaking out and getting those easy yards. You allow the rest of your defensive line to maybe make a play. So I'm hoping to see Toronto do that a little bit on defense.
Exactly. I think that Toronto is not the bully they were last year. However, when you want to play that man defense, you do have to really play. I think you do have to play physical. I think you do have to jam. You do have to not let guys get into their routes. And if you commit to it as a team, in general, you're not going to get as many penalty called because they're just not going to call a penalty on every play. If you commit to it as a team, if everybody is riding guys and riding routes and forcing guys to reroute a little bit, or maybe the break is not as early as they want, I think playing man against Ottawa is going to be a bully mentality. I think it's a really nice way to put it. Like when you're talking about doing that, I think those two go hand in hand. I think Toronto is going to come out in a really aggressive manner and impose their will on Ottawa, at home.
On the offensive side of the ball for the Argos, I think the running game has got to be key. The Argos need to be able to run the ball. That is where you're going to be able to create an advantage, because if Ottawa doesn't have to worry about the run, they will be able to cause problems for you in the passing game, especially if you don't have DeMonte Coxie out there and you can't put it on. Like, this game can't come down to, will Jake Herzlow have a big game? Like, that can't be what is between you winning or losing the football game. It's just too much to put on a new guy like that we barely know. And so you have to be able to run successfully and have Ottawa compensating for that, have them load up the box a little bit, and that's where you're going to be able to make ground with an intelligent passing game, picking defenses apart, taking the occasional shot. I think there's room there too, but I do think you want to run. I love the idea of like gap runs out of pistol. When Kadeem Carey gets going, like some of those carries that he gets out of the pistol formation where he gets ahead of steam before he even gets the handoff, he's a load. He's a really tough runner, an underrated tough runner up the middle. And so that's where I want to see a lot of those hits. And I don't mind the idea of, like, I know Mike Wakefield is an East All-Star and he's a great player. I like running at him. The more tape I watch of Ottawa, the more I think like that's the area of the field you want to target. And almost especially on passing downs, which sounds strange, but like 2nd and 6, 2nd and 7 situations, I'm not adverse to running right at Wakefield there. I think you can catch Ottawa in a pass rush, and I think there's room for explosive plays there. I know that's not a typical run down, but that's why I see the potential in something like that working. In terms of the passing game, I really want to avoid short stuff. I want to avoid passes into the flats. I think Ottawa is going to be ball hawking. I think they're going to be looking for turnovers and pick sixes, and you just can't give that. That can't be an option for Ottawa. I don't want any quick passes out into the flats, things that will go wrong. We've seen Damon Webb take those back on miscommunications earlier in the year. I want the chances. If you're going to take chances and throw 50-50s, great. Do it downfield. Get it deep downfield. At worst, it's an arm punt. I'm completely fine with that. In terms of players I want to attack, Bennett Williams, since taking over for Adarius Pickett, has been great. He's played really good football. He's a high-level football player. I feel like he went to Oregon. I'm not 100% on that off the top of my head. And yeah, he looks like a big-time football player. I think you can find him in space. I feel like if you can attack him out of the slot deep downfield, I think that's where you can win matches with him. So if you can find a way to isolate Mackay Polk on Bennett Williams, find a way to get that matchup, and I do think you can orchestrate that, I feel like there's going to be some vulnerability there, especially as you get deeper and deeper downfield. That's where it seems to open up. And then you also want to test the communication between Money Hunter and DeAndre Lamont. I think there's a little bit of a gap there. They seem not to necessarily be as locked in as the pairings all across the field. So if there's one area I'm looking to bust a seam, it'd probably be between those two guys. And like I said in our injury report, it's Kevin Mittal time. This is not a guy Ottawa's seen a lot of film on. I think he brings something that no one has really seen from the Argos much this year, aside from a play here, a play there. Unleash Kevin Mittal. This is the game where he can really be a difference maker. I don't like Ottawa's defensive backs against him. I think he's a really nice matchup problem that you can exploit. So one thing, JB, what is your one thing in this game? What one thing has to happen for the Argonauts to win?
No turnovers in the first half. I think in a game like this, I speak of, I have in the past, when you're playing a team like this and you are the declared favorite, your primary opponent is hope. You cannot give them hope that they're in this fight. You need them to know that they are down 10-0 and that this is going to be a long day, and that will simply slow them down and they will give over to their position as the less favorite. But if you give them turnovers and you give them good field position, or God help us, say you give them a touchdown or points off of it, now they have hope, and now it's a completely different football game. So no turnovers in the first half is the one thing I want to see.
Mine is also halftime based, and mine is halftime lead. I think if you go into the dressing room up, I think you win that game. I think if Toronto goes into the dressing room down, the pressure starts to mount. It starts to feel like, is this thing slipping away from us again? And that's not a position you want to be in as a team. I think if they can go into the dressing room with a lead, I know Ottawa came back last time, but that's a series of events that isn't going to happen again. And not only will the odds of that happening again are so slim, this defense is not going to allow that to happen again. The offense isn't allowed that to happen again. So if the Argos can go into halftime with a lead, I think they win the game. So that is my one thing. How does this one end, JB? Who wins? What's the final score?
I like Toronto to win. I think Toronto's the better team. I like Toronto to win 35-28.
I've got a similar score, and I echo your sentiments. I think they are the better team. It doesn't mean you win every time you're the better team, but in playoff football with good weather conditions. It's a good coaching staff. They've got great quarterback play, a great running game. It's a really balanced attack. It's a good defense that is really due for a turnover, for some defensive scoring or special team scoring. It's been a bit of a dry spell there. So maybe this is the week that they get contributions from all three phases like we saw midseason. So I think it's a Toronto win. I think it's 32-24. Ottawa maybe try to make a late run, but 8 points is what I have the Argos winning by. It is time for Put Me Down for 20, and we'll always advise you to not take our bets very seriously. Although JB is on a little bit of a tear right now after that slump he went through, I have fallen off pretty badly. I'm now down to my original 200 golden fleeces that I began with. JB, you are at 96 and a half golden fleeces. But this is the time to make it all back, JB. This is where you go big or go home.
Yep.
And again, I will remind you, do not take our bets very seriously. Look after your own golden fleeces more carefully than we have. JB, what do you have for your bets?
Well, I was not very happy with the amount of juice that was out there, I have to say. In terms of the Argos, I went back and forth on a couple of different things. I didn't really love anything, but I did finally come down on the idea of the first scorer, and at least there was they're going to take my money that way. I wanted to go big play specials, but it just wasn't there. So I have first scorer Kadeem Carey at plus 500. I think Carey has shown he can be a goal line guy for them, and I like them coming out and kind of smashing the ball in to open that game. So that was my playoff game, or my Argo game. That, and plus 500 is nice, although of course it's nice. Nice not to be seen. And then with the Lions and the Rough Riders, I like the Rough Riders at home. I took them 6.5 to win by 6.5. I think they're the better team. They were my preseason Grey Cup pick. So at 144 plus 144, I have the Rough Riders winning by 6.5 at home.
All right, and for my two wagers, I'm going to take a defensive score for the Toronto Argonauts. Like I said in my game prediction, I think they're due plus 430 for a defensive touchdown. I'm putting 10 golden fleeces there. And for my non-Argos bet, I'm putting 10 golden fleeces. You'll love this, JB. It's a really exciting bet. It is Trevor Harris under 273 yards passing at minus 114. That is a grinder kind of bet that I know you're a big fan of. So that's where my golden fleeces are going this week. And let's end it with our CFL picks. I was 2-2 last week to bring me up to 51, 28, and 2. And you were 3-1 last week. That brings you up to 43, 36, and 2. Ottawa at Toronto. I'm sticking with the Argonauts. Where are you going for your CFL picks, Toronto or Ottawa?
Yeah, I like Toronto to win. I think they're the better team. They just have they have to take care of business. No turnovers, no special teams mistakes. Just be ruthlessly efficient.
And then for BC at Saskatchewan, I'm going with Saskatchewan here. Let's not forget, I've still got one bet open. The very first bet of the year when I was making a futures bet, I have 10 golden fleeces way back in week 1 on the Rough Riders to win the Grey Cup at plus 1,100. I just thought those were the best preseason odds. I think the Argos were at like plus 650, Riders at plus 1,100. I'm like, yeah, well, that seems like pretty good value. And here they are now hosting a playoff game. So I guess I'll stick with that for now. And I'm going to take them over the BC Lions, who may look different with Vernon Adams at the helm. I know they had their hats handed to them in Saskatchewan a few weeks ago, but it was with a different quarterback. And sometimes the team will respond differently. I also do think it's tough to beat the same team in 2 consecutive games close together. But I just think Saskatchewan is talented enough to do it. So I'll stick with the Rough Riders. What about you?
Yeah, it's hard to tell who BC is. I mean, I think they kind of have that midseason shift, and now they've shifted back, and they look okay. I like Saskatchewan at home. I think it's going to be really hard to win. Saskatchewan does find ways to lose, but I think guaranteed that game is a 3 point game with 2 minutes left. So it will be a fantastic game to watch. But I'm gonna go with Saskatchewan, my preseason pick.
And the BC Lions, like if you're looking for motivation, two All-Stars playing against a team with 9 coming in there. Like you think we got two All-Stars? Let me show you what we got. I think BC is going to
Yeah,
be
no,
plenty motivated.
it is always dangerous.
Yeah.
The
The
All-Star
timing of the
announcement.
All-Star release is not ideal for favorites and teams with home field advantage, certainly. So we'll see how that all works out. Saturday, November 2nd, Ottawa at Toronto. It's a 3 p.m. start. Don't forget to go down to Something in the Water Brewing before you make your way on over to BMO Field, and then you can get home in time. There's a little bit of a half-hour window. You can get home and watch the BC Lions at the Saskatchewan Roughriders. That will just about do it for us on this pregame walkthrough edition of the X's and Argos podcast. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.